We talked about that inverted U-shaped curve that represents the relationship between stress and stress hormone secretion and performance. And what's really interesting is when you look at the different regions of the brain we've been talking about, they follow completely different paths depending on how much stress and stress hormone exposure they face. So when you look at the hippocampus, which is denoted in blue here, you can see that it follows that same exact inverted U-shaped curve, meaning it really likes modest, medium, moderate amounts of these stress hormones in order to function at its best. And again, you can think of that as when the hippocampus has enough energy to do its job, which is to encode or acquire new information that you learn during the day, and then to consolidate it and commit it to memory. It's able to do that a lot better when you have moderate levels of arousal and stress. But once that stress gets too high, you can see it start to fall off a cliff. It just tanks. The hippocampus does not function well at all under high levels of stress. So if you've ever gone to take a test and you know the material, you studied really hard and you know this material, and then you sit down to take the test, you're highly stressed out, and boom, your mind goes blank and you can't remember anything, that is likely, at least in part, the hippocampus being flooded with cortisol and being unable to retrieve all of the information that you had studied so hard in order to learn the material for the test. Actors and actresses will talk about going up on stage where they've learned their lines, they're totally memorized, but then they get on stage and boom, it's just gone. Their minds are just blank. Again, not the only, but one of the culprits there is almost certainly the amount of stress that their hippocampus is saturated with, the amount of stress hormone and stress hormones like cortisol, that is. But when you look at the amygdala, it just ramps up and up and up and up with stress. The more stress it faces, the more cortisol molecules that are binding to the amygdala, the better it functions. But remember, its job is primarily to track and encode only the negative. These are emotions like anxiety, things that you fear, things that stress you out, maybe even things that make you really angry. So as you're getting stressed, your brain is prioritizing just these threatening objects or events in your environment. And if you think about it, that makes a great deal of sense because when you're highly stressed, you might be in danger. Stress is there to tell you something. It's trying to protect you. So you should be orienting, looking around your surroundings, trying to figure out what the threat is, and then eliminate it one way or the other. So it makes a lot of sense that your brain would really hone in on and prioritize just the negative and threatening. However, again, because stress in our lives isn't just acute, it becomes chronic. And therefore you have a hippocampus failing while the amygdala just keeps performing better and better and better. You end up with this unequal information for negative versus neutral, where the brain, it always prioritizes the negative. All right. Again, that's an adaptation, but it's doing that on steroids. It's doing that in the extreme. It's hyper vigilant for negative and threatening information in the environment, and it'll keep scanning for it even if it's not there once the system is highly tuned. So you can see that these two systems in the brain, the hippocampus and the amygdala, which work together to determine what you scan the environment for, what you attend to, what you encode, what you retrieve, and what you consolidate and store for later memory. They're interacting in a way that leads to their divergence when you get extremely high levels of stress hormones, especially when they become chronic. And the way I think about this is whereas these high levels of stress and even what happens in the brain is actually highly adaptive in the short run, because again, you want to prioritize the negative that's there so you can identify it, run away from it, fight it. You can do whatever it takes and then remember it so you don't go back to that location. This negativity bias, which is what we call it in the lab, is very adaptive early on because it helps you survive. But again, if the stress goes on and on and on and on, and we only attend, or we much more often attend to the negative rather than the neutral or even the positive, your brain starts to learn that negativity. And it then wires up to look for more negativity and to remember more negativity. And because the brain is an association machine, over time, if you're chronically stressed, you'll start to prioritize only the negative. And that's what leads us into an increased risk for anxiety disorders and cases of clinical depression, both of which are characterized, at least in part, by this exaggerated negativity bias. Meaning it's really hard to let go of things that are emotionally negative, whether they're anxiety producing or sadness producing. Your brain gets locked in, and because these structures that we've been talking about start to physically rewire, then you are biologically predisposed to become sadder or more anxious, which makes you sadder or more anxious, and round and round and round you go.